So last week, your assignment was to work with shadows and the three methods that you can use for shadows, which are neutral tint, botanical gray, and the complement of whatever the local color is. So now we're going to take that and apply it to an organic form. I sent you images of this tomato in the mail and recently told you that you could purchase your own tomato as long as it had a stem on it. And that was for two reasons. One, I wanted to teach you how to mask, and the other was to just have a tomato that was more than just a red shape. So with this particular tomato, I did a line drawing. And I will do a close-up of that so you can see what that looks like. So here's your line drawing. And I need to emphasize that it is really, really, really important that you give as much attention to this line drawing for the watercolor as if you were doing this for a rendering in graphite. And that means that you have to look very carefully at the structure, especially of the bracts and the stem, and how they grow out of this tomato. And I know it's a photograph and some things are a little bit more difficult to see, but this is a pretty good printout that I sent you. So you should be able to tell where, for instance, this particular brat attaches to the stem. You should also be able to tell that there's a fold in here where this brat folds back on itself. Now there are a couple things that are happening in this photograph that I don't think are working when we get to a drawing stage, and that is what are known as tangent points. And there are a couple of them here that I think that are important and that I think you should change in the drawing before you start to paint. This particular point here is almost a tangent point. You see it? So what I've done is I've just elongated it just a little bit so that the tomato falls behind that stem break. Here you have a brat, and this point on this brat touches another brat right at the tip. So what I've done was I've shortened this just a little bit so that there's space between this brat and this brat, so that it doesn't, because when you're painting this, what happens is when you paint this, it looks like it's all one piece, and it's not. So you want to clarify that in the viewer's mind. Here you can leave this one, but because you can make this darker and this lighter, I'm leaving it for that reason, and that means that your drawing now should be in pretty good shape. The next thing I want you to do before you even start to transfer this is I want you to make a tonal drawing. And that means put another piece of tracing paper over the top of this line drawing that you've done and do an actual tonal drawing where you are putting in the values on tracing paper for this little tomato, because this is what's going to help you to know where your darks and lights have to be. So I'm going to do this entire tomato with values. I'm working with a 5H. I find that on tracing paper, the tracing paper is very responsive to graphite, and it tends to go dark very quickly. So the hardest pencil that you have is what you should use. I'm going to do some of this around here right now so you can see what's going on, because I want to put some value into the stems. Now, if you would prefer to do this on drawing paper, you're welcome to do that. I don't think it's necessary, but it's up to you. Now, if I squint at this, and squinting really helps you to see the difference between light and dark areas, you'll notice that this dark area here is almost as dark as the bracts themselves, and the stem. So that means I would do this dark area first in terms of the value so that I know how dark I'm going to go into this other area. So I'm going to start with the very darkest area, which is this base of the stem here, but still maintaining the difference between the bracts as they come into the stem. So I'm going to go quite a bit darker here. And then I'm going to switch to a softer pencil and then start to put in some more darks based on scientific lighting for one thing and the value that I see in front of me. Now this particular part, this brat is going to be considerably lighter. You can switch back to the 5H if you want to. But then there's a spot in here which is part of the fold of this brat. And then the stem is a little darker than that other brat, which I haven't finished. So I'm going to make this quite a bit darker. And as you can see, it gets lighter towards the upper end. But I really think that doing this process helps you to see your values and your darks and the lights a little bit more easily than if you're just painting them. So now I have a very dark area in here, and this brat here is, and you can see I'm going to separate this from that one in the back. And I might even go to a 2H pencil, because I think that this area here still needs to be much darker under the brat. And this shape will be slightly removed from the other one. And then the rest of this I'll fill in right away with, I want to finish this one off. I'm working the 3H pencil again. And this is a little darker, so this tip will contrast. And then I'm going to switch back to the 5H pencil to start the toning for the tomato. And I will finish this off until I have a complete value on this tomato. Okay, so at this point I have toned in all of this tomato, and I did not use any lines, just values. And as you can see, once I lift this away from the tracing, I now have a value study that works pretty well to tell me where the lights and darks are going, including ambient light and the highlight, which I can even pull out a little bit more. So there you have it. This is going to be your reference, and now all you need to do is transfer this tomato onto your watercolor paper. So at this point, I've just transferred this tracing onto my watercolor paper. But it's really important that you go back in and look at your subject again and make sure that your transfer is accurate. So that's what I'm going to do at this point with a 5H pencil. and I'm going to look at my drawing and make sure that everything is where I want it to be. And the other thing about doing this is that you can get this nice drawing using your 5H pencil or 4H pencil, whatever will give you a nice sharp line. Try not to indent the paper as you're working. That's key when you're transferring too. If you have a good transfer sheet, or if you're doing trace and transfer, make sure you're using a soft pencil on the back of your drawing so that it doesn't require that you press very hard when you need to transfer. So I am going to go over this entire thing again and make sure everything is exactly where I want it to be. Before I start to paint. All this prep is the most important part of this painting. Even if your watercolor work is not as good as you'd like it to be, if you have a good drawing underneath, the painting will look better than it might if you didn't do a good drawing. So basically that's it. Now what I do after I've redrawn over my drawing is I will erase the transfer, because the transfer is done with a soft pencil. And you don't want that transfer to be smudging your watercolor. I may have said this in the past. So you can see now a lot of that soft graphite has been picked up, and all I have left is the pencil lines from the 5H pencil. Okay, next we will do mascoid.